What are the biggest challenges that manufacturers face today?
You can't scale if your processes are this inefficient.
Can you walk us through how ACE Prompt helps convert that unstructured input
Yeah.
into more formal, usable configuration logic for the manufacturers?
What our tool is going to help a modeler do is be able to input that data, copy the tables in, take screenshots if the data's in a brochure, or even just write in natural language.
Welcome to Tech Transformed, the podcast that explores how technology is reshaping the enterprise landscape. I'm your host, Christina Stathopoulos, founder of Dare to Data. This is the second time we are talking to Configit, and in the last talk, we explored configuration lifecycle management. Through this approach, a new way of managing complex product configurations, manufacturers today are able to not only scale mass customization, but do so profitably. So go and take a listen to that podcast if you want to know more about configuration lifecycle management and what Configit does. Today, though, I am joined by a new guest on the show. We are talking to Stella Dambrunel, a product manager at Configit, who is responsible for their new AI-powered capability. It's called ACE Prompt. ACE Prompt is a tool designed specifically for modelers who create and manage the logic behind complex configurable products. Think things like automotive, medical devices, industrial equipment, etc. What is interesting is that Stella and her team have acquired a lot of insight into Gen AI, generative AI, and the current state of this technology, and they've applied it to build a new product. So she's here to share some of her learnings. I'm personally very eager to dive into this so we can better understand how all of this works, why it matters for both manufacturers and the customers they serve, and ultimately where all of this is going. So Stella, welcome. Really happy to have you on the show. Before we dive in, could you introduce yourself? Tell us a little bit about what you and your team do at Configit.
Yeah, great. Hi. So I'm Stella, and as you said, I'm the product manager at Configit, and my team are the ones that have dived headfirst into looking into what this new boom in Gen AI can do for us. And specifically, we've decided to target that problem that you've mentioned, that modeling configuration data is quite difficult and labor intensive. So we've developed this product to hopefully help our clients do that more easily and more efficiently.
Fantastic. Well, we'll get to dive into more of this, learn a little bit more about it. But to set the stage, I want to rewind back. I always like to start with a problem statement. What are the biggest challenges that manufacturers face today, especially as we see product complexity is growing and customization is just becoming the norm? And also, how do those challenges impact the ability to scale?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so I mean, what product complexity means can be a couple of different things, right? So you can have in manufacturing, your product can be complex because the engineering is complicated. It's a very complicated machine that you are building, and the engineering of it is the restrictions imposed by engineering are far ranging and complicated. Then your product can be complicated simply because the amount of variability is growing, like the number of options you can have. And this can be totally driven by the company itself wanting to offer more options to their customers. But it could also be driven by the manufacturing in multiple different countries, the selling in multiple different countries, meaning that you have to have different options for different countries, for language, for legal reasons, for regulations, and all this. And also the other one is complexity is introduced because the product evolves over time. So you can have this variability, this growth in your variability of your product happening almost organically just over time as things change in your product. Not all manufacturing companies come out with a completely different brand new product every year. What they're doing is evolving an existing product over time, and that means the complexity grows. So there's all these different types of complexity. And then, as you say, customization is becoming more and more demanded. And when you have these very complicated products, you have this classic problem of the order penetration point. Like when does the order become assigned to the client that's buying it? And you can get stuck if you don't have configuration, if you don't offer, you can get stuck in either your ETO scenario, engineer to order, which has long lead times, is very labor intensive, and sometimes is not even that nice for the end customer because they have to customize absolutely everything. So it's almost overload, right? When you have an engineer to order scenario, or you're in the make to stock scenario, right? Which most industrial manufacturing companies cannot afford to operate in a make to stock scenario where they're making single products and they have loads of them on the shelf and they just sell according to forecast, right? So most companies, they want to be somewhere in the middle. They want to be in a sort of assemble to order, make to order place. But if they don't have the configuration aspect of that well worked into their pipeline, they can't offer the level of customization that their customers want. So yeah, they very much end up in this problem where they do a little bit of configuration, but it's potentially not very well managed, and the configuration is done by the different departments separately. So your sales department are doing some configuration, the engineering department have to do some manual configuration, manufacturing are doing it separately, and your data is super fragmented, super spread out over all these departments, and you get errors. You get a lot of errors. You get a lot of time lost because of manual processes of communication between these departments, which can often be in different countries, which makes the whole process even more complicated. Yeah, and I guess that's what impacts their ability to scale, right? That you can't scale if your processes are this inefficient around customization.
Yeah, of course. And I want to focus on one of those last points that you mentioned. First of all, it's obviously very, very complex. But you mentioned this idea of having everything scattered around, right? A lot of the issues come down to the fact that many teams still rely on information that's scattered across spreadsheets, across documents, even people's heads. And I think this is very common in the manufacturing industry.
Yeah.
You are the PM for a solution that addresses exactly this, right? Can you walk us through how Ace Prompt helps convert that unstructured input into more formal, usable configuration logic for the manufacturers?
Yeah. So, I mean, at the base of what Configit does, we provide configuration software, right? We provide a configuration engine, and in order for that to work, we have to formalize your configuration data. We have to turn all that knowledge that is fragmented and scattered into logic that can be compiled and used to run a configurator. And so formalizing your configuration data usually requires you to have a bit of knowledge on how to write a rule or a constraint logically. And it requires you to have a good global overview of the whole product sometimes, which can be very difficult. And so if the data is very fragmented and in a spreadsheet, converting that into well-formalized logic requires a little bit of expert knowledge, because essentially it's like writing code, right? You can represent configuration logic a little bit like code, like software code, but you have to be able to write it. You have to know how to write that, and that's not something that everybody can do, nor many people have time to do. So at these manufacturing companies, often the people who know the most about the products might be the product managers or the engineers or the sales engineers, and they don't have time to learn how to formalize logic in a specific syntax. So often this task gets given to a modeler who does know, who makes it their job to do this. But there's always information lost in translation, And these spreadsheets have always been designed slightly differently, right? So, but what our tool is going to help a modeler do is be able to input that data, copy the tables in, take screenshots if the data's in a brochure, or even just write in natural language what the constraint is. That also opens it up to the product managers and the engineers themselves to be able to add things and to make changes, because they can just use whatever language they speak to ask the AI to make a change without having to know how to use a piece of enterprise software, where to click, or how to write this write in this language that represents a configuration model. So that's what the tool is going to do. And we hope that this will also help our clients that have the data that's often not very well mapped, right? So there might be multiple spreadsheets from multiple departments, and they're actually all referring to the same thing, but they use a slightly different code for it, or they're for example, let's say you had the option for color, right? And this is known across multiple departments, because the manufacturers know that you have to paint it a certain color, and the engineers know about the color, and certainly the sales and the marketing department know all about the colors. But in the different spreadsheets, they have written color differently. Some have used a British spelling with a U, and some have used American spelling without a U. Some have used a capital letter, this sort of thing. Or they've used a slightly different product code, an old one from 5 years ago, this sort of problem. And AI will be much better at catching this mistake by asking you, by whoever's putting it in, prompting you and saying, do you mean this? I've seen this before. Are you sure? This sort of thing. So it will hopefully help to catch errors if your data is a bit messy and fragmented to begin with. And then on top of that, of course, it's not like all clients come with a big mess of spreadsheets. Some clients, some of their data is already perfectly well structured in maybe their PLM system or their SAP system, right? If your data is already nicely structured, AI isn't the tool to use, right? Then you should use an import tool. You should get all the data from one place to another place programmatically, and that's fine. But that's never the whole picture. So you import that data, and then you add the data that you don't have perfectly on top. So an example could be you have good data coming from your PLM system, but you want to add some marketing rules over the top. They're not engineering rules, they're marketing rules. They're about, we're not going to sell that in this country because we don't think it will sell very well, so there's no point. But the PLM system doesn't care about that, right? So, and you can have it the other way as well, where the data coming from SAP is very perfect, but you're missing a lot of other data coming from somewhere else that is in a spreadsheet, and you need to add that. So that's what the tool is for. And we it's definitely going to grow. It's at the moment, it's very much a tool where you do small iterations, and the human is in the loop all the time, checking, making sure that is what they want, and certainly reducing the amount of time that anyone would have to type or click. So yeah, but in the future, we might see it being more like an agent that can run semi-independently. That would be very cool. Yeah.
I
mean, it is already agentic, right? But like, we'll see how far. It also depends on how much people trust AI, right? Over time, trust will either go up or down. We will see.
The trustworthiness is pretty important. But I think all of this makes sense. And now of course, once the logic is created, it needs to stay accurate and consistent across the entire business, and trustworthy, of course, like we said. But this ties directly back into the idea of configuration lifecycle management, or CLM. So in your own words, can you explain what is CLM? Like, how does this help manufacturers maintain that shared source of truth across all of the teams that are involved? Because you have design, you have engineering, manufacturing, sales, service, and they need to be coordinated.
Yeah. So as you put it perfectly, so it's all about managing the configuration across the entire life cycle of the product. So it's about linking in everything from early design through to engineering, through to manufacturing, well, sales, and then manufacturing, and then even service at the end as well. Because if you are a company offering highly customizable, configurable goods, and then you have to go and service them, you need to remember that configuration. You need to have that linked in, because there will be, if you have to replace parts or things like that, then what parts might exist the day you sell it versus the day you have to go and fix it, you have to have the same logic involved in doing the service side of things, where will this new part be capable of fixing this product that was made 5 years ago or 10 years ago? Will it work with all the customizations that the client selected for this product? So it's all about having a shared source of truth amongst all these departments. And it's not necessarily that everything has to be authored in one place. It's about each department can continue to author their part of the logic, but having it combined so that they are all aware of each other, and you don't get these siloed effects where engineering says something is possible and then manufacturing says it isn't, or vice versa. You have to have all the truths coming from all the departments together in one shared place so that they can all call each other. Yeah, that's what CLM really is, I think.
Yeah. Okay. I got it.
Yeah.
I come from the data and AI world, but through the conversations with you all at Configit, I've learned a lot about how all this works within manufacturing, and how even it impacts us as customers, as clients. It's super important, all the things that you're talking about. Now, building on that, many organizations are dealing with the fragmented, inconsistent data to begin with. We've already talked a bit about that. And they need to deal with that before they can even think about putting the CLM approach into place, right? So I want to circle back to ACE Prompt. And if you can give a little bit more information about how ACE Prompt supports all the cleanup and simplification that's needed for building all these strong configuration foundations that you need. Because after all, you really cannot have CLM without getting those foundations right first.
Yeah, exactly. And I think that is sometimes feels like quite far off from the final benefit, right? The final benefit of having a CLM solution and all the things that can bring, of having a single shared source of truth, and then either the client or even the salesperson puts the configuration in, and everything just pops out, the E-bomb, the M-bomb, the quote, everything, that's very easy to see the benefit, but you have to go so many first steps back. You can't even start on that journey if you cannot consolidate your configuration data, if you cannot start from some configuration model. And so ACE Prompt is very much at the beginning of that process. And so many manufacturers, unfortunately, and they're very aware of it. It's not like they don't know, but they leave it too late. They not too late, but they leave it late enough that their data really is messy. And there's so much beauty in Excel. It is often the tool that people use. It is often the tool that people choose. The other tool that a lot of these customers have is people's minds, right? They have it all in these people's heads. And these engineers, for example, that have been at a company for 25 years, they know the product so well, but they've been at the company for 25 years. They're going to retire. They're going to leave. And you can't afford to lose that person. So even if you could live with continuing to work that way, you can't. And I think for so many customers, it gets quite bad before they're willing to, they realize they have to make the investment to start consolidating their data into one place. And most of the time, it's not always the case. Sometimes we see that the data, we've been told before that the most up-to-date data is in their marketing brochures because it's customer facing. So the best place to find the most up-to-date product data is in a brochure. That tells you something, right? But But most of the time it's in Excel because it is such a useful tool. Everybody knows how to use it straight out of school. You can basically design it, optimize it however you want. So it's very versatile. Everybody knows how to use it. And it's also so well integrated into our way of work, sending it by email, having it in the cloud, being able to edit them together. And you can have multiple sheets. And then quite often your first sheet is some sort of logbook, a change log of all the changes that someone has made to the spreadsheet over the last 24 months. And it can seem like a very daunting task, right, to formalize this. So yeah, to go back to your question, the way that we want ACE prompt to work is that it lowers the barrier to entry to slowly starting to formalize that data. However, one thing we have done in ACE prompt is we've actually made it possible for you to continue editing that data in an Excel-like experience. We have something that very much looks like Excel inside there, so that it doesn't feel completely alien to people. They can continue viewing their data as though it was in Excel, and it behaves the same way that Excel does with cells and adding columns, removing columns and rows and copying and pasting and search, replace, find all this kind of stuff. So much as in our business, we'd say you shouldn't use Excel, we also appreciate why so many customers use Excel. And what we're trying to do is basically have an AI assistant help you there, but also in the background, we're actually making sure your data is clean and consistent and in a safe place, and not just living in an XLSX file that you're sending by email to various places. And of course, it's automatically hooked into our APIs and our ability to compile into a package that will then be used to run your configurators and things like that. So it's a tool that will hopefully lower barrier to entry for consolidating your data, but also that will make you much more efficient in the long term with maintaining it, and it not being only something that one or two people in the company can have access to. It's also about democratizing it, right? So that more people can be involved, and you don't have to play a telephone game of we've heard that a lot, actually, where you might have an engineer, they explain to a modeler how they see things. They draw a diagram. That's the other one you sometimes see, where a rule or a constraint is represented pictorially, which AI is also quite good at interpreting. You take a screenshot of it, you put it in, you say, what is this? Write this as a rule. But anyway, the engineer sees things a certain way, and then the modeler goes in and they add the rules. And then so many, days, weeks, months later, the original engineer looks at the configurator and they go, this isn't the behavior that I was expecting. This isn't how I wanted it to work. And it takes so long then to go back and to find where the miscommunication happened, because the engineer was too far removed in a sense, and the miscommunication happened right at the start. And it's not necessarily anyone's fault, right? It's not the engineer's fault, it's not the modeler's fault. It's just that the AI ends up being the third person in the room who can offer options and be like, okay, is this what you mean, or is this what you mean? I think AI is going to be very powerful doing that sort of work for people.
Yeah, and you explained it well. It's like the telephone game. It's not somebody's fault, but it just happens as we try to communicate from one to the next. And I really I think it's a smart move that you have put this Excel sort of format within it, like you were talking about, because it really helps with the user experience. Like you said, people are used to using Excel. If they have this familiar environment, they'll be much more readily willing to adapt to the tool, right? Now, I understand that you all have had some early beta testers trying out ACE Prompt. including internal teams as well as lots of external interest from large manufacturers. What have they told you so far? Like, what stood out the most? Any use cases that you can share?
Yeah. So internally, the use case that stood out the most was this modeling from a brochure. Because
The marketing brochures that you
yeah, sort
talked
of
about. Yeah.
marketing brochure scenario, right? Because without AI, you have to retype everything, right? If it exists in a PDF or even in a document, there's no way you can do partial import with a tool or API. Without AI, you have to retype everything. And so we did a test internally, and we got our own modelers to model a brochure, and it took them 20 hours to do without AI and only 4 hours to do with ACE prompt. So it was really quite obvious how much time they saved. So that was nice. And then we've demoed it to quite a lot of clients and prospective customers. And there's a few things that have stood out that have been maybe even a surprise to us. So one is the one you just mentioned, the Excel-like UX. We've had quite a few people go, oh yeah, then I don't have to learn a whole new thing. I can keep using Excel without using Excel, right? There's this sort of a one toe in, one toe out feeling about it, because it's so ingrained into the way that people think and work in these large manufacturing companies that, the mental shift of going towards configuration lifecycle management, if it also requires a complete shift in the way that you do everything, it feels like such a mountain that's, you can't get past. So people have really appreciated that, potentially even more than I thought. But AI basically allows you to do that, because you can ask your very, very specific question and it can go and find all the information you need and return it to you in a very succinct and human readable way. And so that's been very encouraging, actually, that so many, you see the light in their eyes when they're like, oh, I could just ask the question, because otherwise it would take me hours to answer it all by myself. So they've really liked that. Yeah, and we've had some clients say, oh, if only we'd had this tool when we had to move everything 10 years ago from these awful brochures or things like that. So yeah, people are excited for sure.
Yeah. I'm not surprised. The Excel one doesn't surprise me so much. It makes a lot of sense because you're pulling down the barriers to adoption. You're making it much easier for people to move into the environment. So I want to change a little bit the subject. We've talked about it, of course. I want to talk about generative AI. Based on the experience that you've had, what would you say is the current state of generative AI technology? Because you've obviously learned a lot during all this because you're incorporating it within this product, right?
Yeah.
And also, what can we expect in the near future? And linking to that, even what other applications of Gen AI is Configit considering going forward?
Yeah. So we've, as we've said, we've been very much focusing on the very early part of the whole process with ACE prompt, right? All about clarifying messy input and trying to consolidate it into a nicely well-structured, well-maintainable piece of logic. But downstream, there's so many more things we could do with AI to help you test your data, validate your data, even further down towards product selection or guided configuration in the configurator. That is something that a lot of customers will really appreciate, because, yeah, you can imagine a customer, if the customer is directly the one interacting with a configurator, they might not know whether they would rather have this thickness or that thickness, right? It depends. They have their hopes and dreams, they have their problems they need to solve, they have their scenario, and yes, they want it to be as customized as possible, but they're not necessarily in the best place to answer.
Well, to wrap up, do you have any last words for our listeners?
Yeah, I guess if you're interested in learning more about configuration lifecycle management, then next year or this year, in 2026, we will have a configuration lifecycle management summit, a CLM summit, in the springtime. So watch this space and please join the summit. It's an online event, so and you can learn a lot about what CLM is, the benefits that our clients have from going on this path, and also about Ace Prompt, of course. So
Of course, of course. Well, everybody, you heard that. You need to make sure you watch the space and you block your calendar for this event. Now, that brings us to the end of this episode. Stella, thank you so much for sharing your insights. And to our audience, if you want to find out more, head on over to configit.com, CONFIGIT.com. To our Tech Transformed community, thank you for tuning in. If you found this episode valuable, please follow, rate, and share. Join the conversation on X and LinkedIn at EM360 Tech, or visit our website for more expert insights.